And we've got, yes, there is another bottle of Sauvignon on the way. It's just straight coming in from Teatro Bar, and it's Tuesday. She's got it's the hit news at the moment.
Is it Sauvignon?
There is more wine.
Pinot Grigio.
Our good friend Pinot Grigio.
Charlie, what is this wine we're drinking here? Are you familiar with this? This is straight from the Teatro freezer here.
Bella Modella.
Yeah.
Pinot Grigio. I mean, it's a classic one. Beautiful wines, thoughtfully crafted to keep the world in good shape. Well, it's not keeping me in good shape, but it'll keep me happy. There we go.
Sounds
delicious.
Yeah.
Tastes delicious, actually. It's very nice.
Yes, I'm enjoying it.
When did you first discover your love for white wine, Charlie?
Oh, from birth, I'm sure, to be honest.
Then we've only got half an hour. Don't answer that question.
It's a very, very long question to go into white wine. I think it was, to be honest, I used to drink anything when I was in university. I'm Welsh and a musician, so I've always liked a bit of alcohol. But I used to avoid wine because I couldn't afford the wine that wasn't paint stripper. You know, that £4 bottle of, was it Villa Isla Negra or something, which is always in the corner. It's awful. It's the same thing that if you ever want, I'm offering this to anyone, if you ever want a good paint stripper, don't go to Wickes, go to your local corner shop and get a bottle of Isla something Negra. It's great. It'll strip the walls of anything. So at that point, I hated wine. Then, when I got my first job, I had this thing in my bank account called money, which I've not seen for a while. Or ever, actually. And I invested in what I call a more expensive £6 bottle of wine. And since then, it's been a good relationship, actually. We've had some tough times, but we've got through it.
It's been steady going with the wine.
I think that's the phrase.
Is Charlie the biggest white wine fan in the room, or do you reckon he's got some competition?
No, that's a strong nod. I'm nodding.
In most rooms, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not just
any
not
given
just
room.
this room, yeah.
And that's the impression we have of you, Charlie.
We could talk about music at any point.
No, this is just an intervention for...
I mean, is this just like a really, really, really nice version of the AA? That's not the car, like, saving company.
We've lured you
I mean,
here.
that might do something.
So,
You never know.
Charlie. How does that make you feel?
So I guess it's quite good that you guys enjoy your own company, since you spend most of it, you spend most of it in each other's kind of ear holes, in each other's proximity. Have you bonded, let's say, over the last few weeks of playing the same very, very complex show by yourselves over and over again?
No.
Hate each other.
Or hesitated at that point.
Absolutely not.
I feel like we've got to a point over the last couple of weeks that we actually don't need to speak to each other anymore. We actually can just communicate how we're feeling by a specific raise of one eyebrow.
Pretty much.
But, that was interesting.
So a lot of your communication is visual, since, you know.
I mean, it's supposed to be. I mean, I don't know whether these guys watch me. I wouldn't watch me. I've got no idea what I'm doing, to be honest.
What I find really funny is that Charlie can speak to us in our, as you put it, ear holes during the show, but we can't talk back. So it's really tricky.
Right.
Charlie's really funny. He'll make little comments on what's going on in the show. And we have to try and keep a poker face. It's really hard.
I do quite enjoy when you try and catch it, though. It's a sort of subtle...
I do try and give
acknowledgement.
I just hate ignoring you entirely.
And so it will be this, very. Let's just say the experience
Voice
of the
of
audience. Maybe the experience of the audience won't quite be your experience show to show, because you're not thinking of this poignant moment. You're thinking, do that better tomorrow, or whatever it is,
definitely.
Yeah.
But there are moments where I get really caught up in it, because there's several entrances that I've missed because I've been like, oh my god, I'm literally on the stage. And there's these amazing performances. This is brilliant. It's like we're like in the world that's been created. Yeah. It's quite fun, really.
I think we were just discussing tonight as well. What I was discussing. I think once you've done a show like this so many times, you've got to get it you've got to get it under your fingers as a musician, and then there's such a danger at points at that point where. I always find that if I overthink things once it's under my fingers, I can end up making more mistakes than just letting my muscle memory do what it did. But the other aspect of that is I definitely did a song tonight which I remember starting, but I don't remember it happening. We just got to the end and it seemed to have happened. And all I remembered was how to say thank you in Korean throughout the whole song.
Which is?
감사합니다.
Very good.
Why? How did that come up?
I don't know, but this is what happens. We just have moments. I mean, the song was lovely,
from all
definitely-
accounts.
Very
But I definitely just
Oh, yeah.
zoned out into a lovely little world.
Yeah, well, that's quite nice.
Mm.
I suppose you find ways to keep each other or yourselves occupied. You know, it's obviously very difficult. The playing through this, you know, especially on 2 show days, right? And I'm just baffled, to be honest, about the Korean.
Can we go back to the Korean?
I think we've quite realised that I'm a very strange being, and I don't know what goes on from 1 minute to the next in my brain. I don't think I'd want to know,
Fair enough.
or anyone. Should we please move on quickly?
Yeah, let's move on. Alex. So, what would you say?
I don't speak any Korean, by the
No,
way.
I'm not.
What would you say is your
I know I
favourite
looked quite.
Korean
I'm the wrong
phrase?
So, Alex, it says here you're a London-based guitarist, classically trained at the prestigious Royal College of Music. Do you think your trajectory has only accelerated since
Oh,
that
no,
moment?
it's only gone downhill from there.
Yeah.
That was the peak of my career,
Way out
getting
the
into the
barn.
essay, and then since then it's gone. As my college professors, I'm sure, will attest to. No, it's been great. I've been really fortunate to play. Have a really varied career. Actually, I was classically trained, but nowadays I don't do so much of that. I do a bit of musicals and a bit more sort of popular music, electric guitar, that sort of thing. But it was a really great foundation for me, being classically trained. It means that I've been able to play a lot of different styles. So I've been very, very lucky, and thankful to my time there. It's been great.
And you're probably into a lot of different styles as well. I mean, it's like classical music is obviously very foundational, but it's I suppose there's an element of if you're in classical music purely, you're in a bubble a little bit, and
Sure.
it's if you want to kind of get into the, let's say, mainstream culture or kind of go be a part of that, then you have to look at what everyone else is listening to.
Yeah, well, no, for sure. I think that was the case definitely for a lot of the other people that went to the RCM. They were kind of trained from the ages of 3, 4 just to be solely just a classical musician. But I've always been interested in other music. It wasn't just classical music that I wanted to pursue. So I was quite lucky in that. In that I didn't become sort of too stuck in one box. So.
Ros, as well, did you start with music first or did you start with acting first?
What came first, the
Music.
chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
Music, yeah, music.
Music,
Which I
right.
consider the egg.
Okay. You consider music the egg.
No, I don't know what that means. Started at 5 playing the piano. Started reading music then. And then started the cello about age 8 or 9, I think. And then the acting didn't come in, actually, because then I started dancing at like age 10. And it was at my dance school. They did drama. They also had the whole drama school attached to it. And they were like, why don't you do the drama? And I was like, nah, I'm not into that. And they were like, why don't you do it? Because then we get more money. And I was like, nah. And then eventually
Seems a fair deal to me.
And then, eventually started doing the Lambda speech and drama exams and things. And then ended up with what became a passion for musical theatre. But I hadn't realised that the music and the singing, the acting, the dancing added up to musical theatre, let alone actor musicianship, which I didn't even know existed.
Were you as hilarious as you are now before you started acting? Was that
I
why?
don't know whether to take that as a compliment or not.
Oh, it's totally a
Is
compliment.
that a good thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'm going to be bold and say I think so. Because I used to want to be a comedian. Like when everyone says, "What do you want to be?" And you're like an astronaut. I would say astronaut and comedian.
So did I.
But then I learned the word comedian and
Yeah.
said I wanted to be a comedian.
Yeah.
With the eyebrow.
Yeah, I was like,
Comedian, you always have to.
Comedian.
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 Is that still a dream? Do you feel like you have a
Absolutely not,
one-woman
no.
show in you?
No, although I mean, there have been moments because I've got lots of friends who do a lot of stand-up, and I've always thought, oh God, what a horrific thing to try and do. That would be absolutely terrifying. But then I got this job, like a day job in schools, doing presentations to teenagers who are arguably like the best training ground for comedy, because these presentations were supposed to be funny. When you're trying to make a group of 14, 15-year-olds laugh, like that's hard. They don't want to, they won't give you anything unless they actually find it funny. And I was doing this day in, day out before I got my incredibly big break 2.5 years ago. yeah, so now I kind of feel like, oh, well, you know, if I were to learn, because I think it is something you can learn. Like,
Well,
my
and it's something
friends who
you
do it,
put
they
together,
have
I
learned.
suppose. I mean,
Yeah.
it's something. It's like it's a project, just like any other. I
Yeah,
suppose.
I guess a big part, like half of it is the writing and half of it is the delivery, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I'm an acting musician.
It's like an equation, isn't it?
Comedian
All
is a,
equals.
Why do you ask me if I'm as hilarious? What do you mean, performing or?
well,
being.
no, just here right
I'm
now.
a bit
Here right
taken
now.
aback. Oh, okay.
Yeah. The personality of Roz is
it
like
big?
that all the time.
Oh, it's not.
Quiet down.
Fair enough. What's quite
Library.
cool is that all of you have quite unique sets of skills, if I may. And all of you come from quite different backgrounds, yet you are all drawn to this, which is quite nice. And Charlie, for example, you do a lot of arranging and writing and things like
Lots
that.
of writing.
Yeah. What's coming up for you, bro?
Well, I'm going to Cheltenham to do panto there, so my laptop is currently about to set fire with arrangements to that. And then for the last 4 years, I've worked at a little theatre called the Mill at Sonning, which I adore, just outside Reading. And what we've done is we've taken these big MGM Broadway musicals of the sort of 50s and 60s and the 40s actually as well, such as High Society, and we did Guys and Dolls last year. And this year's Singing in the Rain, and sort of reduced it to make it work in that space. But we're always very aware that even though you're reducing a show in size, you can't reduce it in the grandeur of what those amazing movies were. So that's my latest challenge. Is we're doing a reduced version of Singing in the Rain, and trying to do that with less than 30 musicians is quite a challenge, but definitely fun, and I enjoy it a lot.
And did you start in one particular instrument, how early on was like writing?
I started on the piano. So I used to. My grandma bought me a keyboard. No, actually, I lie. She bought herself a keyboard because I think she was bored with the daytimes, and she tried to play it, and she accepted that she was very not great at that. However, I found that quite quickly, and used to come home from school when we go to my grandma's, and I end up playing the songs we've been playing in assembly on that keyboard by ear. So that's how it sort of started. And then my parents went, maybe we should spend some money on some lessons for him, which happened.
Maybe he's our ticket out of here.
But I was never really a fan of... I mean, I'm sure they still think that. I'm still hoping. But I was never really actually... I was not a good student, because I always wanted to play what I liked to play and what sounded nice. And sort of ignore what's on the page, which actually, when you're training to be a musician, is quite a big no-no. So I was quite frowned upon throughout my whole learning experience of the piano, because I just wanted to play by ear and play musicals and play what I thought sounded nice. However, about 20 years later, that's coming quite useful, because now as an arranger and an orchestrator, I do the same thing and sort of half ignore what's on the page, and I come up with new interpretations of things, because I just do what I think sounds right for our version of the show and come up with new ideas that people might have never thought of. So even though I was sort of frowned upon all the way through my education and university, I was not a popular piano student in university. I sort of lost interest when they started telling me how to use the pedal. I got quite bored then. It
was quite similar, like retaining your creative edge, Alex, that being a straight ahead classical musician was never quite enough, and I suppose Roz being a musician was never quite enough, right? So that kind of brings it back to what's quite interesting about this bunch is that you all saw something in this show, for example. Isn't that interesting?
I think the score of this show is beautiful. And actually, I've done, like I said to you, I've done quite a lot of traditional musicals. I've done a lot of pop musicals. And actually, that's sort of where it is a lot of the time now. You get a pop musical or a jukebox musical, and they have traditional shows. But actually, this is a sort of... This show has something about it where you can't sort of place it anywhere. It's got this unique sound to it that's got a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this. And it is so much influence on the score that I think it's so interesting. It was interesting for me to see how this score... Because, I mean, you don't read a script as I don't read it as a director. I read it as what's on the page before I come to a rehearsal. So I don't read it in an interpretive way. I read it on what the story is. But it didn't really, in my eyes, match the music. So getting in a rehearsal room, I found really interesting to sort of work out how this period drama essentially works to this contemporary piece of musical theatre. So that was interesting for me. And also I think as well, a lot of musicals that we know now have, you know, a cast of 20 and a band of, you know, anything from 8 onwards. And actually it's just 2 actors and 3 musicians. So there's something interesting in that as well. How can you make this 2.5 hour piece of drama colourful and interesting and fluid with so little people?
Well, it's quite funny at the moment with theatre, I suppose. I think theatre in general used to be a lot more scaled up like that, and the big commercial stuff is still like that, I suppose. But what's obviously, you know, film happened, iTunes happened, everything else that wasn't live entertainment happened basically to theatre. Right now, I think it's what's maybe, I don't know, more incentivized or just more possible is the more scaled down kind of show, the more scaled down kind of thing.
I think scaled down is
But
an
what I
interesting
was-
phrase,
yeah.
because this show isn't really scaled down. This is
No,
a
sure.
show that was, I think, very specifically written for the voices that are there. And like what I said,
Oh, no,
is-
definitely,
is
definitely.
there are shows which are big and made smaller, but I never use the phrase scaled down. I think it takes a lot of thought to make a big show small from creatives, and I think actually there's a lot of thought and time that goes into making it, that it still has everything it needs in respect of the original film and the original music and the original writing. It's just done with less people in a more creative way. But
Yeah.
I think that's what's different with this is I couldn't imagine this show bigger. I think it would be
Oh
weird.
no, absolutely not. And what I think is interesting about that is that some stories, I think maybe more stories than we assume, work on a really small scale. And this is kind of what I think about a lot is, you know, watching, you know, TV or film or whatever, you know, the competition, I suppose. A lot of it is actually very single character focused or has a small ensemble itself, even though there are these massive production teams and stuff behind it. It seems like there's a movement for something that's kind of more true and more new, and that's quite nice.
Yeah, I feel like that comes down to the basics of story writing, because they always say if you're wanting to write a story, establish your theme and establish your characters, and if you have, or your main character, and the minute you have those things, everything else sort of needs to pad around that. So if you focus instead on the big production of it, and then don't really care about your characters, or care even just slightly less about your characters and your theme, then it's not really going to work.
Or care
So
more
I
about
feel
the
like
spectacle.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like all shows should be, as Charlie was saying, there should be an element of being able to do it with fewer performers and fewer instruments, because it should have that essence at its heart. And I feel like that's what this show is. It's all heart, isn't it? It was written to be how we're doing it, with the exception of perhaps, you know, having the instruments on the stage.
Yeah.
And it feels so big because of that, because its whole essence is there in front of you.
I think that's a really important aspect as well, because that's also why I work in theatre. Is I love musical theatre. I love the music. I think the music's amazing. But I very much work in musical theatre around story. I need to know why that song is there. What's the purpose of that song? Why that song's in that key? Why is that the orchestration? And I think that's what's interesting about us as well. Is 3 of us. I very much am a musical creative, but I come based on story. Alex is a very traditional classical musician who does a lot of theatre, and I think and Ros is an actress as well at full time. So we've got 3 different very broad spectrum ideas of how music works. So actually, all of us throwing off ideas are just as important as one another. Actually,
Yeah. Alex, what attracted you to this story in particular, and is there something that you look for in maybe musical theatre? Was there something in it that in this story in particular, or in this genre, I suppose, that you like?
Well, for me, as a musician, as a sort of freelance guitarist, it always comes down to the music for me personally. And this score sort of really excited me. It was really interesting. It wasn't like anything I've ever played before. I've never played in this sort of this band as well. This configuration
right?
of piano, guitar, and cello is quite interesting, and it actually works really well in the music, and the writing as well, especially for the guitars, like really sort of idiosyncratic, and it works really well in this configuration. That's what that drew me to the job, actually taking it. And
And for you, it's all about the music, right?
Primarily, yes. I mean, it's nice that there's such a beautiful story behind it, but for me, it always comes down to music personally.
Yeah. What's other things have you been drawn to musically? In recent history that might give us an idea of
recent history. That's quite a broad question.
In recent history, well, what kind of things are you usually drawn to, I suppose?
Since the 1600s.
Stormy evening in June.
No, I'm thinking like what things do you usually go for in that respect?
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, the music I like primarily is sort of groove music, I guess. Anything which has a groove, which covers a wide spectrum for me, sort of Brazilian music or jazz or soul music. That's kind of the music I'm interested in writing and playing myself. But equally in the musical theatre world, I love playing on small shows like this. Last 5 years is another one that I really enjoyed playing on. That's the type of the music I go for in this world.
And Ros, what kind of what would be your answer to that? Do you reckon? Are you drawn to things musically? Are you drawn to things based on the story? What do you think it is? What's the chicken?
That's a really
What's the
interesting question. I think it's the sort of I guess more genre, I think, actually. But then the music has such a big part to play in defining the genre, so I think that you can't really separate them. But I really like the shows I get involved in are often quite folky. Like, I've got a few, I always think, I don't have enough audition pieces because I've just got the few that I tend to play. But the fact is that most of the auditions I get through, I can play those few pieces, and most of them are, like, I've got a Joni Mitchell, a bit of Fleetwood Mac, and they tend to be perfect for the auditions I go for. But then I love also, I've learned so much over my relatively, so far, short career of like different genres, like jazz. I was in a show that was like sort of like Latin jazz cabaret. It was amazing. And and how that can be incorporated into musical theatre and folk, sort of combining.
On a slight curveball, can we mention Vampire Hospital Waiting Room?
And Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair.
And Apocalypse
They go
Cruise
hand
Ship
in hand.
Love Affair. Of course they do.
Yes, we can.
What on earth is going on?
I think there's a vein of comedy there. They're two really funny shows. I've seen one of them.
Yeah.
We've turned this into a really funny show as well, and Just So is hilarious, obviously.
Yeah.
There seems to be That's
true. I've not yet been in a show that's not been funny, and I wonder whether that's because even if you don't define a show to be, or any story to be, of like the funny variety, getting across any kind of feeling or any emotion, if you want any audience member to emote in any way, there's going to have to be some humour there, I think.
Right.
Because even in the saddest of stories, there's going to have to be something there that makes them laugh. And often, if I go and see a show, I'm like, wow, that's made me laugh, and I'm crying. Like, it's so sad, but it made me laugh, and it makes me cry more. So, I don't know. Yeah, obviously Vampire Hospital Waiting Room and Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair are both just flat out comedies. There's no tears in those. Just to fill you guys in. So confused. These are shows that I got involved in at university. I went to university in Edinburgh, and obviously the theatre scene there is thriving. And some of the people who are in the Improverts, which is the Edinburgh Uni improvisational
I love that
troupe, started this show called Vampire Hospital Waiting Room, which I think came from, they'll probably correct me on this if they ever hear me say this, but somebody in one of their improv shows came out with the phrase Vampire Hospital Waiting Room, and someone said, you can make an entire show off of that. So they went, all right. So they did it in a week, and then it grew. That was in 2012, I think, and then it's had various iterations. I got involved in 2015, playing the evil Mrs. Baldwin, and it's just the most ridiculous shows, an hour long of just, it's like a laugh a minute. It's kind of like, oh, what were the critics saying? The many critics that came along. It was like Monty Python meets something else, and then we did another
Vampires.
one. We did another one, which is like probably likely to be the second in a trilogy, though the third doesn't exist yet, called Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair, which again, the whole story has sprung from the funny title. Equally funny, equally ridiculous. And
It's
I did
funny.
those. I was at Ben knows them because I was at the Edinburgh Fringe doing them this year. Again, we revived them. Last time we did them was like 2016, I think.
Right.
And then, yeah.
I feel like I need to see those.
They're very, very good.
I need to
Very good. Hi, brow.
And what do you reckon you look for in your work, Charlie? What are you drawn to?
My God, these are broad questions. As in, like, what shows I like to work on.
Well, maybe in terms of maybe, because I know you, like, one of your real passions is arranging. What kind of stuff do you aim to take on there?
I'm always open to do any sort of show. I mean, I have a massive passion for new musical theatre. I love working on new musical theatre where you can get into a room and have those conversations about songs and those conversations about bits of underscore that may or may not exist, but you never have them as detailed on shows that are already written as you do on a new musical. There's nothing better, I always find, that when, and actually just for the look on the composer's face of panic when you tell them this song doesn't work and we need a new song by tomorrow. And the look of panic is worth it for musical theatre just in itself. But it gets a discussion of why we actually do this for a living, and I love new musical theatre for that. But I think the main thing for me is if I'm going to do a show, it's got to have an element of not rewriting it, but it's got to have an element that it's got to have our take of that show. And I love to work with directors who, like I just said, go back to the story and actually look at the music in a way that works with the story. I love musical theatre. I love tap dances. I love kick lines. I love the lot. But if it doesn't make sense at that point in the show, no matter how crazy the show is for me, it's not for me. And actually, I find it really interesting that you can do the same show, it's the same book and the same score, but with different actors, it isn't the same show. So actually, that original score and those original arrangements work perfectly for a lot of people and the original production, but might not work for this director's take on it or this actor's take on the show. And I think as long as I can get in a room and have some sort of creative aspect or creative opinion on a show, I'll do anything to be employed. Do you know what I mean? But I think that's the main thing for me. If there's not a lot of say or discussion, it's not as interesting to me as a project where actually you can get your teeth into it and really discuss what you're doing and why you're doing, and maybe try this in a different way.
Can relate, do you think?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
In your, you've got some studio work, right, that you do, Alex. You've got
Yes.
a few projects there. I suppose in that kind of vein, what kind of stuff do you aim for in your studio work? For example, we know the genres that you really like working within. Are you trying to add anything new to those, or are you just happy celebrating those genres?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always been about celebrating those genres for me personally, because I feel like every person will have a different set of influences and a different view on each genre that they might play. So they might not be reinventing the wheel, but it'll be a different perspective purely because it's a different person who's lived a different life, who's listened to other music other than that. So that's what I try and bring to it.
I find it really interesting that there are lots of people, and not just people working theatre, people in the music industry and people in the play industry that think that pieces of theatre shouldn't be touched. And I think actually theatre dies if you don't play with it. I think it's healthy to look at traditional plays and traditional musicals and traditional styles of music and actually reinvent them, because it's still reflective and still very respectful to the original material, because we wouldn't have anything to play with if it wasn't there. But I think as musicians and as actors and as directors, we have a duty to keep that work alive.
Yeah, totally.
So to keep that alive, we do have to reinvent it in a way, because there are younger people coming into this world that should experience it, but they might not like it as the version it used to be. But actually we could bring something that will attract a new audience for that piece, and it keeps that piece moving.
It can be hard though when there's a script of something written, like I'm thinking of Just So. It was written not that long ago for a specific, it was at the Chichester Festival Theatre, and the script was very much for that production. There was like descriptions of like, at this point the huge crab enters from like diagonally the top of the stage right from the
right next
and
to
it
the
was
fire
like describe
exit.
features of that specific theatre. Yeah, exactly. We were like, this literally doesn't exist here. And there were things that specific actor had done during that speech, and it would be put in as a stage direction. We were like, that's just not going to work for us. And obviously it's fine to not adhere specifically to those stage directions, but it can be hard
possible.
when it's sort of being dictated and you have to go, okay, now I'm going to tear myself away from that and do something original.
And I think it's quite scary to first do that. And there are some works which you get told outright you can't do anything with this, and that's fine. But there are some works where actually, especially with composers and writers that are still alive, a lot of the time, they encourage it, and sometimes they want to get involved, and that's always lovely when they want to get involved. And you hear of some shows that come alive and they have a revival, and the writer wants to get back involved with it, and they come back into the rehearsal room and they write new songs because they get excited by a new company and a new take on the show.
It is one of those things about that is important to keep these things alive. Completely. And to keep them fresh. And I think even if it's just honouring a genre or reinventing something, or purposefully, or doing, or just solving problems that you just need to practically, in a creative way. Those little creative decisions that you make, I think what comes out there is something that at least sits in its own context, in its own time. I wonder why these Disney films get remade or whatever. It's like, okay, what's the reason why they do that?
Money.
I'm thinking, okay, yeah. the rights were running out. Yeah, that's right. But a lot of stuff gets remade. A lot of stories get retold, I suppose.
I think with theatre as well, it's very dependent, like Ros was just talking about, on space as well.
That's true.
On
practicality.
I'm doing a new production of Singing in the Rain, and as much as I would love to make it as the traditional production of it, had about 40 people in the cast and an orchestra of 25. We're doing it at a little mill theatre just outside of Reading, where if we put an orchestra of 25 and 40 people in that building, there's no room for any audience. So, you've got to scale it down into a way that's very respectful but realistic as well. And actually, sometimes just taking people out of it isn't doing that piece justice. You've actually got to rework it slightly so the story's still taken in the right way and the music is still reflected in the way it should be with less people. You can't just do it with less people or cut some of those orchestra parts.
That's true.
Equally, there's shows that start off really in a really small venue with a small cast and small orchestra, and then they get picked up and they want to be made much bigger. And you can't just add people in, because that's not going to make it
10
harder.
more people to play that note, and we're good.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Or if the previous cast have been multi-rolling, doing like so much work as an ensemble, and then they make it bigger and they just give loads of the different parts to other people, you lose so much of the charm of it and what it was potentially good for in the first place.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's some of the things
really
that
interesting.
you lose scaling down.
That's
in the wrong
really
way,
interesting.
you'd also lose scaling up.
Yeah, and it's not. That's really interesting, and I'm going to try and explain it. It's because something being the same show scaled up isn't the fact that the same show isn't the same going to be exactly mathematically the same while scaled up kind of points to something within this kind of story, within this kind of script that you're trying to reach for, that kind of...
I think it's like when you stretch out like a bit of Play-Doh,
you
and it
see
just
more
gets
detail.
thinner and thinner and thinner until it breaks.
So you've got to add
You've
more
got to
Play-Doh.
add more into it. You've got to think about it and fill the gap.
I don't think I've ever heard a better analogy.
Play-Doh. It's all about Play-Doh.
I think that was quite clever. I was actually seeing it as well. I see your 7 basic plots and I raise you Play-Doh analogies. Wow, that's broken, but I've only got pinks, so it's going to have to be blue and pink.
Sorry, it's all we've got. And that might be all we've got. Thanks for coming on the show.
That was a beautiful segue, man.
Oh, that's really good.
I like that.
Oh, man.
You're made for TV.
I've come
I
so
like the way I
far.
said that very close to the mic. Beautiful segue.
Shut this down.
I tell you, I've come so far in the last half an hour.
It's a journey.
So smooth. Right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been Ros and Alex and also Charlie from Daddy Long Legs. I really hope you guys have a great rest of the run.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
See you again. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.